11 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, October 19, 2020, the committee is resuming its study of the implementation of Mi'kmaq treaty rights to support a moderate livelihood. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of September 23, 2020. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website, so you are aware the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. To ensure an orderly meeting, I would like to outline a few rules to follow. Members and witnesses may speak to the official language in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen. I don't know who has their microphone left on and we're listening to a phone ringing, but could you please mute your system, please? I'll start again. Members and witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. For members participating in person, proceed as you usually would when the whole committee is meeting in person in a committee room. Keep in mind the directives from the Board of Internal Economy regarding masking and health protocols. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. If you are on the video conference, please click on the microphone icon to unmute yourself. Those in the room, your microphone will be controlled as normal by the Proceedings and Verification Officer. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. With regard to a speaking list, the committee clerk and I will do the best we can to maintain consolidated order of speaking for all members, whether they are participating virtually or in person. I would now like to welcome our witnesses. Today we have, as individuals, we have Michael Dadswell, Professor of Biology, retired, and as well as an individual, Gary Hutchins, retired Detachment Supervisor for Department of Fisheries and Oceans. Here, representing the Canadian Independent Fish Harbours Federation, we have Melanie Zonenberg, President, and we have Jim McIsaac, Vice President, Pacific. We will now proceed with opening remarks for...
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Bragdon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is just, again, should be a fairly brief point of order, and looking forward to hearing the testimony tonight. I just wanted to make sure as we get ready for the conclusion of the study coming up, there's a few documents we wanted to have included as evidence for its current study. And I have a motion that's in both languages, and we'll send that off to the clerk and to you right away for translation. And it's just to make sure the inclusion of certain documents in for the study report. So I'll read the motion if you're okay with that, and that's being sent as we speak to you and the clerk to be circulated.
Okay. Has it been translated, Mr. Bragdon?
Yes, it has. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, it has. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This says that the committee adopt the following documents as evidence for its current study titled The Implementation of Mi'kmaq Treaty Fishing Rights to Support a Moderate Livelihood. Number one, a Supreme Court decision, R versus Marshall, number 1, 1999, 3 SCR 456, and R versus Marshall, number 2, 1999, 3 SCR 533, and the 1760 and 1761 Peace and Friendship Treaties, and McDonnell-Laurier Institute 2019 report, the Marshall Decision at 20, 2 decades of commercial re-empowerment of the Mi'kmaq and Maliseet, and the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans second report from the second session of the 36th Parliament titled The Marshall Decision and Beyond, Implications for Management of the Atlantic Fisheries. And that's also included in En Français aussi, and I believe the clerk should have that to circulate. So I just wanted to have those documents included in preparation for our study report.
Thank you, Mr. Bragdon. Before we get into any discussion on the motion, of course, I'll have to make sure all members have received it in both official languages.
Sure.
I have not received it. If you can send it to me so I can distribute, please.
Okay. The clerk hasn't received it, Mr. Bragdon, so I guess we'll have to wait till that's done and then wait to make sure everybody has it before we proceed.
Sure thing. I'm pretty sure it's been on its way. He says it has been sent, Mr. Chair, should be received anytime.
Oh, as you know, Mr. Bragdon, all members have to have access to it before we
Yep.
can vote on it.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Yep.
I got it, and I'm about to distribute. Thank you.
Okay, has everybody received it? I'm not seeing any no's or any thumbs up either, but anyway, I'll okay, I see Mr. Calkins with a thumbs up, Mr. Morrissey with a thumbs up, Mr. Arnold, Mr. Hardy, Mr. Blanchet-Jonca. Still waiting for Mr. Williamson. Waiting for Mr. Batiste and Mr. Beach. Mr. Batiste. Mr. Beach, thumbs up. Mr. Johns? Thumbs up. Okay.
And Mr.
Everyone
Cormier
has it.
also.
Mr. Cormier, yes. Sorry, Serge. So do I hear any discussion on the motion as proposed by Mr. Bragdon? Hearing no discussion, Nancy, I'll ask you to do a recorded vote, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Merci, Monsieur le Président. La motion est la motion.
Thank you very much. This is a motion received from Mr. Bragdon. For the vote.
Mr. Batiste?
I vote in favor.
Thank you. Mr. Beach?
I vote in favor.
Monsieur Cormier?
I vote in favor.
Mr. Hardy?
I vote in favor.
Mr. Morrissey?
In favor.
Mr. Arnold?
I vote in favor.
Mr. Bragdon?
I vote in favor.
Mr. Calkins?
In favor.
Mr. Williamson?
In favor, please.
Monsieur Blanchet-Jonca?
Je suis en faveur.
Mr. Johns?
In favor.
All yeas, que des oui.
Thank you, Nancy. The motion is carried unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Bragdon. We'll now go to our witnesses for 5 minutes or less, please. We'll start with Mr. Dadswell.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Dr. Michael Daswell. I began my fisheries career in 1965 working on salmon in the Miramichi. Graduated with my PhD in 1973, went to the Huntsman Marine Laboratory and worked as a fisheries biologist on the St. John River. In 1977, I joined DFO, worked on lobsters, scallops, and tidal power environmental impact. And then in 1987, I moved to Acadia University, where I taught marine biology and fisheries biology for 33 years. I see my role here today basically as a defense attorney for the lobsters. Scientific fisheries research over the last 100 years has established what is known as the scientific concept of biological management for the conservation of fish stocks. And fish stocks are extremely susceptible to effects of exploitation and environmental change on the recruitment of the young to the stock. Fishery stocks are fragile and sensitive. To survive exploitation, recruitment must be good. The biology of the stock then is critical to survival. Last Monday, the witnesses did not explain the importance of lobster seasons that well for the conservation of lobster stocks, so that is where I'll begin. A little history. The Canadian lobster fishery began in 1880. There were no regulations. It was the Wild West. By the 1920s, the stock was collapsing. A number of regulations were introduced with little effect. And then during the 1930s, Dr. Wilfred Templeman of the Canadian Fisheries Department undertook research on lobster life history around the Maritimes. There's some lobster biology facts that you should all hear first. Number one, mature females only molt and reproduce once every 2 years. This slows their growth, and when they are not buried, i.e. carrying eggs, they stay longer in the exploitation window. Therefore, it's extremely important to protect them. Male lobsters can only pass sperm to females just after molt, when they are in the soft shell condition. Females then store the sperm, but they do not release and fertilize the eggs until 1 to 3 months later, depending on temperature and so forth. At the right time, the female chooses, she fertilizes the eggs with sperms and releases the eggs, and then she glues them to the underside of her abdomen. The females then carry the eggs for 10 to 11 months. Delayed release of eggs means that the take of a female before she releases her eggs and becomes buried is basically the same as the take of a buried female. That her production then is lost to recruitment. What Mr. Templeman found, Dr. Templeman, back in the 1930s, was the growth, maturity, molt, and egg release periods of the lobster varied around the Maritimes based on the local environment. In the Gulf of St. Lawrence, because of warm summer temperatures, females matured at a younger age, about 5 to 6 years. They were soft shelled by late June. That meant they could reproduce or be inseminated at that time, and they usually released the eggs by August. In southwest Nova Scotia, lobster district 34 that we're talking about a lot, females mature much later, 7 to 8 years. They're soft-shelled in July and August, and egg release does not occur until October or November. The seasons then were established based on these findings and the considerations of marketing and desirability of lobster. Soft-shell lobsters, as you talked about in the last meeting, are not only susceptible to high mortality while they're being handled, they are also at a high risk of being attacked, killed, and eaten by other lobsters when they're in the lobster trap. Lobsters are cannibalistic. That's why they have those rubber bands on their claws when you buy them in the market. Essentially, the seasons are closed in most areas until after the soft shell condition is over. Also, soft shell lobsters have poor meat quality and consumer appreciation is lower. Because of seasons, Canada has established a superior quality of our product. Taking lobster outside the season leads to recruitment over exploitation through the loss of females to the stock, higher mortality of soft shell animals, and less consumer appreciation. Now, the problem with all this is that the effects of lobster exploitation out of season will take anywhere from 7 to 10 years to be evident. I'll just give you all an example that you probably know quite well. In Newfoundland, the lobster fishery, the cod fishery collapsed in 1992. The onshore cod trap fishers in Newfoundland were warning DFO that there were no juvenile cod evident in their traps for 5 years before the Newfoundland cod collapse. Essentially, their warnings were ignored. So based on these lobster biology facts and the present very healthy state of the lobster fishery, in my opinion, Mi'kmaq fishers can make a good, moderate livelihood by fishing in season like all the other lobster fishermen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dadswell. A little bit over time. We'll now go to Mr. Hutchins for 5 minutes or less, please. You're on mute, Mr. Hutchins. You're on mute. Your time is ticking. You have to take yourself off mute. Okay.
Is that better? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Great, thank you. My name is Gary Hutchins, and I was a fishery officer and detachment supervisor with the Federal Department of Fisheries and Oceans for almost 32 years. As a fishery officer, I took sworn oath to enforce the Fisheries Act and regulations pursuant to the Act. My personal experiences are many, and I have been involved in enforcement of all fish species on the East Coast, as well as the Fraser River salmon on the West Coast of our great country in 1992 after the Sparrow decision ruling came down from the Supreme Court of Canada. I had the privilege to sit with Indigenous elders who were drying salmon on the banks of the river on endless wooden racks. They would tell stories about their rich, fascinating culture and spiritual beliefs, and I was fascinated. However, the large majority of my career was enforcing the many commercial fisheries as well as Indigenous fisheries on the East Coast. I can tell you, commercial fishermen are a unique breed. They are the hardest working, incredibly driven, tough, proud, principled group of people I know. And further, they have earned every penny that they have through hard work and determination. Yes, we butted heads, but they knew I had a job to do. And as one fisherman said to me, Gary, I don't like you one little bit, but I respect you for what you were doing. And then I charged him. We can all disagree the terrible and tragic events that have transpired since September the 17th are unacceptable, and I don't condone them. These actions are fear-based and not racist. Let me ask you all this question. How would you react when you feel powerless and abandoned by the Minister of Fisheries and your elected government? At this point, you feel backed into a corner, believing that your livelihood could be threatened. Whether or not this is fact-based, the simple truth is one person's perception could also be their reality. Perhaps the reason for this behavior is that fishermen were already aware that there were approximately 3,000 Indigenous lobster traps in St. Mary's Bay, and they witnessed the destruction of a resource they pay huge money to be a part of, all under the guise of a food, social, and ceremonial fishery. In the summer of 2017, my detachment, Digby CMP, received information that a large quantity of lobster was discovered in a ditch alongside a secondary road. We initiated an investigation, and through our investigation, we located thousands of pounds of discarded lobster in the woods located near the town of Weymouth, Nova Scotia. This is also adjacent to an area where several Indigenous vessels landed their daily catch. Through our investigation, we could not conclude on reasonable and probable grounds that the lobster were dumped by lobster buyers or possibly Indigenous fishers. Lobster buyers would have discarded them because shortly after taking possession, they would have died. Similarly, Indigenous fishers would have discarded them from their holding traps. Nonetheless, this was a blatant and total disrespect for a valuable resource that provides income for thousands of people. And Mr. Dadwell already talked about the lobsters and their survival rates. So I'll just move on. This commercial fishery that Sipanakatik wants to establish will cause a massive destruction of lobster. We have witnessed this for years, this type of destruction associated with the FSC fishery. Fishery officers have conducted thousands of patrols and regular checks in St. Mary's Bay. And through these efforts, we have seen juvenile lobster used as bait and many with eggs attached. Fishery officers have witnessed untold numbers of dead lobsters in traps as well. This is a major conservation issue. Allow me to speak to the facts for a moment. There is no Indigenous treaty right associated with harvesting lobster. The FSC fishery was established by policy by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans to allow Indigenous people to access the harvesting of lobster. Now we have a self-imposed attempt to create a commercial fishery by Chief Sack and others using licenses and tags created by themselves. Access to the fishery is lawfully regulated in the following manner. A license created by the minister with tags issued by the minister, with these tags affixed to the traps in the manner for which they were designed. I am perplexed as to why we were here discussing the creation of another Indigenous commercial fisherman when one already exists. Actually, two, if we include the FSC fishery. The federal government purchased and provided to all bands a variety of commercial licenses, including lobster, as well as vessels. The purpose of this undertaking was to provide a moderate livelihood to Indigenous people, thereby fulfilling the obligations set down by the Supreme Court of Canada under the Marshall decision. Perhaps a better question to ask is why Indigenous people are not getting access to these licenses to pursue a moderate livelihood. Perhaps the reason is because these licenses have been leased back to white business owners, which then take opportunities away from the Indigenous people. I have spoken with Indigenous people who have expressed the desire to pursue a moderate livelihood from fishing, but have not been given the opportunities. The Fisheries Act is the supreme law in Canada governing our fishery resources, and not the Minister of Fisheries nor the Prime Minister can violate this law or any law. The Fisheries Minister should step down, and further, if anyone else had have done this, they would have been charged by it now. The Minister
Thank you,
of
Mr.
Fisheries
Hutchins. Thank you, Mr. Hutchins. Your time has gone over. Hopefully anything else that's left in your testimony will come out in the line of questioning. We'll now go to Ms. Sonnenberg for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon to the committee members. The Canadian Independent Fish Harvesters Federation represents more than 14,000 independent owner-operators across Canada. Our primary species are lobster, crab, wild salmon, shrimp, and groundfish. We produce over $3 billion in landed value, which translates into $10 billion at retail, and much more to over 1,000 coastal communities in our country. Including crew members, we employ over 40,000 workers, and we are the largest private employer in coastal communities in Canada. My name is Melanie Sonnenberg, and I'm the president of the Canadian Independent Fishers Federation. And today I'm joined by our Federation's Pacific Vice President, Jim McIsaac. Our wheelhouse is the Canadian fishery. We are here today to discuss independent harvesters' role in the future of the fishery and why it is important for us to be part of consultation processes regarding the fishery. We are not here to challenge treaty rights, but to discuss sustainable fisheries as we see them. The three core components of sustainable fisheries are legal access, rights or privileges, harvesters with their knowledge, and our technologies with vessels and gear. Harvesters, as a core component of sustainable fisheries, have four important relationships with the ecosystem, our communities, our economy, and our governance system. All these relationships are important if we are to protect the resource and ensure benefits to our communities and future generations of harvesters. The work to protect independent harvesters dates back over 100 years. On governance, we work closely with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans in a symbiotic relationship that includes fisheries management, stock rebuilding, advisory committees, licensing issues, setting levels, and establishing harvesting effort controls. Our relationship is not perfect. Too often, the department is fixated on ecological objectives and has no resources to pay attention to socioeconomic objectives. Over the last decade, we have been working to drive this into the new Fisheries Act and to ensure equitable distribution of benefits from our fisheries so that all harvesters and coastal communities are primary beneficiaries of our resource. Without us driving socioeconomic objectives, our fisheries would all be controlled by corporate and foreign entities. Our investment of time and knowledge into sustainable fisheries are significant. The net effect is tens of thousands of middle-class jobs that sustain over 1,000 coastal communities. We are not part of any direct dialogue between the federal government and First Nations around the term moderate livelihood. And so in the absence of that discussion, we would pose the following questions. With multiple definition, multiple parties, will limited entry be destroyed? If so, will fishing as a serious livelihood be destroyed? All legal fisheries are currently licensed, regulated, monitored by the federal government. Is this cornerstone to be replaced? How do we protect the resource when harvest plans are not consistent across all sectors of the industry? Is it not important to monitor catch to prevent overfishing in any fishery, including FSC, commercial, or recreational? Won't the illegal sale of fish from any fishery undermine the sustainability of our legal fisheries? Is it no longer important to protect our market, align our fisheries seasons, and have conservation and protection rules that apply to all? As license leasing reduces the net proceeds that go directly back to local communities, is this new objective in our Fisheries Act now irrelevant? Doesn't leasing to corporate entities undermine local ownership and erode net reach to all coastal communities? We have been advised that we could see up to 35 separate management plans in Atlantic Canada alone. Is this workable? Will this make DFO's job of protecting our common resource more challenging and further complicate understaffing in many areas of the department? We must find a way to manage the sector that doesn't cost more than the income from the sector. Can we afford both standards and enforcement? Should regulations apply to all harvesters equally in each fishery? If not, will we not have chaos? Our members want positive working relationships with nations in their geographic areas. Presently, we work with many in training and mentoring, marketing, species advisory committees, science, and research. But by not being at fisheries consultation tables, we're all left to speculate that we, the fishing industry, are on the menu. In summation, we have proactive and productive options that could work in solving some of the current hot and concerns that our harvesters have. To achieve positive outcomes, we need a meaningful role for independent harvest organizations in fisheries reconciliation negotiation. The adoption of existing consultation models that are used for international fisheries negotiations like NAFTA and NAFO, where stakeholders provide advice and are a sounding board to the government, need to be adopted. A common goal that all harvesters participating in our fisheries be treated equally. Enforcement applies to all. Alignment on seasons, regulations, and fishing zones is paramount. Avoiding of multiple management plans for one fishery. In closing, on behalf of the Canadian Independent Fish Harvesters Federation, we would like to thank the Standing Committee for this opportunity to present. Mr. McIsaac and I would be pleased to answer any questions the committee members may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sonnenberg. Just a couple of seconds over time. We'll now go to questions from the committee members. I would ask and remind people as well to, if you're not speaking, please put your microphone on mute. And to the questioner, please identify who the question is to. It'll make it a little easier to get the answer quicker and make more productive use of your time. So now for 6 minutes or less, Mr. Bragdon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to begin. I know, Mr. Hutchins, you were kind of in the midst of your testimony. You may have about a minute or so, I take it, to wrap up. I'll give you a bit of my time for you just to wrap up if you want to take a minute just to finish your statement. And then I've got some questions I'd like to ask. So go ahead, Mr. Hutchins, and just finish off your statement.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I would like to finish off by saying the term white racist fisherman has spread like wildfire, especially in the media and across Canada. And this greatly upsets me because this is simply untrue based on my 32 years of experience and knowledge. Commercial fishermen have been vilified by our government leaders and our media. Our federal leaders have categorized fishermen as racist and terrorists. Because of these comments, Canadians believe what our elected leaders are saying. Now Canadians believe this to be so, thereby labeling commercial fishermen in Southwest Nova Scotia as racist and terrorists. If this is the case, we must assume that their wives, their children, their grandparents, their parents, their friends, perhaps the whole community is racist. As well, after all, racism doesn't exist in a vacuum. Everyone wants to focus on the acts of the commercial fishers, and so it seems everyone else involved in this incident gets a free pass. The first thing you learn as an investigator is to investigate both sides of the story, collect all the facts and the evidence before making a decision. This opportunity was never afforded to the commercial fishers. They were instantly tarred and feathered by our elected leaders, media, and as the result, the citizens of Canada. Remember, this incident was caused by an illegal fishery, and is the cause with which without this incident would not have occurred. Guilt before innocence is what has happened. And without doubt, our leaders in Ottawa are not entitled to a free pass. They must act with integrity, dignity, and carry themselves in a manner that is above reproach and disrepute. They have fallen short. It is time for our leaders to apologize to the commercial fishers, their families, and the community. Canadians to look to our leaders to bring us together in pursuit of our Canadian dream, not to divide us with harmful, hurtful, divisive, and destructive comments. As a Canadian and a former DFO officer, I have always supported Indigenous rights and always will. But this is simply an illegal fishery, which should not have occurred, and I do not support it. Thank you, sir, so much.
Thank you, Mr. Hutchins. And now I want to move into some questions. Obviously, we've heard testimony. I want to thank each of the witnesses for taking the time to be here tonight and bring your perspective to the table. And we'd like to just start off by asking, and I'll start with you, Ms. Sonnenberg, in regards to, there's been a lot of discussion around the potential or the possibility of the establishment of a separate or second independent fishing authority. What would be the feeling of your association in regards to that? And have you been consulted in regards to this talk for a independent second separate fishing authority? Ms. Sonnenberg.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Bragdon. The Federation members, as the Federation goes, have not been consulted with on this matter. And as I said in my presentation, having a separate table would be devastating to the fishery and the management of it. Our membership has been clear across the board to the Department of Fisheries and to anybody that will listen that it simply will not function. It sets us up for certain disaster.
Thank you. Do you feel, Ms. Sonnenberg, and I'll go to the other guests as well, do you feel that there has been adequate consultation with all stakeholders on behalf of the minister in regards to this as we were leading up to this point and the escalations that have happened? Do you feel like there has been proper consultation, or is that improving at this point? I'll start with you, Ms. Sonnenberg, and head over to the other witnesses as well, Mr. Hutchins and Ms. Dadswell.
I would have to say, Mr. Bragdon, that the consultation has been very weak on our side. We are told repeatedly that we really don't have a place, that this is government to government. My members continue to ask where will Canadians fit into this dialogue, and I think that's the most important thing for us to establish is with the department and with other government agencies that are in the reconciliation discussions, we have to know where fit. And I think Gary's comments were very, very appropriate in terms of fear that's come from the fishing industry is being driven by this lack of communication. And we must find a way forward to inform the people who have such big investments in this industry.
Thank you, Mr. Hutchins, Mr. Dadswell. Quick comment on that.
Well, certainly I guess the creation of another fishery seems to me to be somewhat redundant. The federal government has provided $600 million in licenses to cover off the moderate livelihood. The fact sheet of the 1999 Supreme Court Donald Marshall decision clearly says that the government has First Nations communities have been provided with licensed vessels and gear in order to increase and diversify their participation in the commercial fisheries and to contribute to the pursuit of a moderate livelihood. So that's already been established by the Marshall decision and the actions taken by the federal government to meet those obligations. And so here we are today, like talking about the creation of another commercial fishery when already one exists.
Mr. Dadswell? You're on mute, sir.
Yeah, I agree completely with the statements just made. Not so much from the side of the humans involved, but from the lobster side. Over-exploitation of female lobster by one means or another in a long-term fishery where soft-shell lobsters are caught, females that have not extruded eggs are caught, is going to collapse the fishery sooner or later.
Thank you, Mr. Dadswell. Thank you, Mr. Bragdon. We'll now go to Mr. Morrissey for 6 minutes or less, please. You're on mute, Bobby.
Sorry,
You're on
Chair.
mute, Mr. Morrissey.
I'm going to follow up with Doc. No, I'm not.
Okay.
Am I?
Go ahead.
Can you hear me now? Should be. Yeah, okay. My question is Dr. Dadswell, and I want to follow up on your comments. So you would provide testimony to this committee that that if we don't conserve the stocks accurately, if we don't protect the female lobster, soft shell lobster, it would have a negative impact on both the commercial fishery as well as any moderate livelihood fishery for First Nations.
That is correct. Everybody would suffer.
And could you explain to the committee from your perspective, because you introduced yourself as a defense counsel for the lobster, I believe that was the terminology
That's right.
you used. You were stated
Yes,
you were unbiased in your approach, so I take that, and so your testimony is important. So because some of the issues being studied by the committee is. Can the government of Canada through DFO put limitations on a moderate fishery without imposing on treaty rights? So if you were to leave it wide open, then
are you there?
You could interpret that as having a negative impact on the long term.
Oh, Mr. Morrissey,
we're losing you, Bobby.
Yep.
Your question didn't come through.
Mr. Morrissey, this is the correct.
I can hear you now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Dr. Dudswell?
Yes. Yes, I'm listening.
I don't believe the witness heard your question, Bobby.
Okay, Dr. Doswell, from your expertise as a biologist, if the government of Canada does not impose restrictions on seasons and on the time when you harvest lobster, then it could very well have a negative impact on not only the moderate livelihood fishery, but the commercial fishery as well. Would I be correct in that interpretation?
I would say you're completely correct. Both fisheries would suffer and the lobster stock would suffer.
So from that context, and you explained very clearly the reasons why you should have seasons because of the vulnerable state of lobster at certain times. You used a reference. Could you expand a bit more on the exploitation window?
What I meant by the exploitation window is that most lobster traps have a ring, and that ring is set to be a certain size to get the largest number of lobsters of the right size for marketing. And most lobster fishermen don't particularly want to catch the biggest ones because when they go in the trap, they can kill everybody. So they try to keep it to a certain size. And with the lobster life history, the fact that the females only molt every second year means that they grow slower than the males. So what happens is you have your vulnerable females that you absolutely need to keep the stock in a good shape, staying longer in that exploitation window that the trap can catch. So that means your actual catch rate of females would be higher than the males over a long-term period.
Okay, so good regulations, good policy, good seasons is important to both the moderate livelihood fishery as well as the commercial fishery. I want to go to Ms. Sullenberg, Melanie. And Melanie, could you elaborate a bit more on where your group, you're a very credible organization I've known for some time. Could you expand a bit more on where you would see a meaningful role in the negotiations for the commercial industry?
Thank you, Mr. Morrissey, for the question. I think for us, we need to find a place where we can understand what is being discussed about us, but yet without us. We need to have an opportunity to have some input about what the impacts may be over the course of time. What the impact, as we've heard from Mr. Dadswell, what the impacts on stocks will be in different fisheries. presently, because we don't know any of this, we don't understand, what the future holds for us. And I think a table for us needs to have some detail and some substance. And it isn't about denying any rights. It is about not acknowledging what has been established by the Supreme Court. What it is about is making sure that we have a better understanding and that we have some protection. I mean, we have an industry that has invested in fishing heavily, for sure. We have thousands of fishermen across this country. And they've established our coastal communities as we know them, and know that the prosperity in these communities has grown as of late. And so we need to recognize that, figure out a way collectively to ensure that everybody is protected and that we have some sense of community together. This isn't a dividing and conquering. This is about working together for the best of everybody.
Thank you, Ms. Sonnenberg. Thank you, Mr. Morrissey. We'll now go to Mr. Blanchet-Janka for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, thank you to the witnesses. My first question for Mr. Dadswell. I listened to you very carefully, and you have a very clear testimony, and you know that you can have a very unbalanced situation, and it can take several years to correct errors. And what is the importance of scientific data in managing fisheries?
We have a problem. I'm not getting the interpretation. How can that be fixed?
Mr. Dadswell, it's the clerk of the committee. If you can go down on your Zoom screen, click over
Yes.
Interpretation, select English.
I don't have that on my Zoom screen anywhere. No, there's no interpretation written.
Mr. Chair, would you want to suspend a second? We'll be back.
Might just be English. It says English down at the bottom.
Doesn't say anything.
It may be in your participants area. Sometimes language interpretation is there.
I'll try that. Yeah, okay. Participants, I have. Doesn't say anything about language that I can see. It just has the names of the participants.
Mr. Chair, could you suspend, please?
Yeah, we'll suspend for a moment. French as well. I would make a suggestion that maybe we could find some time this week to maybe ask the witnesses to come back at a time when it is available in both official languages, because Mr. Blanchet-Jack, I do agree, you should be able to express whether it's a question or a statement in the official language of your choice, as it is the same right for me as a English-speaking Canadian to express myself freely. So you should have that right, and we'll make sure that if that is not available, we won't allow the meeting to go ahead in the future. But the time for this hour is up. I'll suspend for a moment just to switch out. And Nancy, I will ask if we can find some time somewhere.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Hawkins.
Okay, well, I'm sorry, Chair. I think you were actually going to get to what I was going to suggest. So I apologize for interrupting, Chair. Why don't I let you finish your thought, and then if there's something more that I want to say, I'll interject then.
Okay, I was going to make sure that the clerk understands that we have permission to invite these people back again at a time convenient for the witnesses and convenient for committee to reconvene and have a full round of questioning where all members can ask questions and get to their point in both official languages.
If that doesn't work, Mr. Chair, if I may, several of us who would have had an opportunity to ask questions of the witnesses, could we put those questions actually in writing through you, Chair, to the clerk, and the witnesses provide a response in writing? That way, in case they're not able to come back, I think that we should have the opportunity as MPs to hear what these witnesses had to say, and apologize to the witnesses for the technical difficulties, but we do need to maintain the rights of members of Parliament here. So I would love to have the witnesses back, Mr. Chair. That's just my opinion, but I would love to just be able to ask the questions of the witnesses that I wanted to, that I missed the opportunity to.
Exactly, and we'll make sure that's either available in person or in writing, and even in both official languages for that matter, so as everybody can see the full context of the conversation. So we will suspend now for a moment just to switch out witnesses, and we'll leave it up to the clerk then to line this up at the earliest convenience possible. Speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. When you're ready to speak, you can click on the microphone icon to activate your mic. A reminder that all comments should be addressed to the chair. Interpretation, as we've been practicing with in this video conference, will work very much like in a regular committee meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. And when you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. I would now like to welcome our witnesses. Of course, here is an individual, Andrew Roman, retired lawyer, and as well, Eric Shiley, barrister and negotiator for the I'm not even going to try and pronounce it, negotiation office, because if I try to pronounce that, I'll crucify it and I'll never live it down. We will now go to opening remarks from Mr. Roman for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you. Can you hear me fine, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. McDonald and committee members and your hardworking staff for inviting me. As a nonpartisan witness with no economic interests at stake, I feel free to explain the law as I see it, while recognizing that others may see it differently. My relevant experience in analyzing laws and judicial decisions, and I've also drafted federal and provincial legislation. However, I don't claim any special expertise in Aboriginal treaty law or in fisheries law. So while I was preparing for today, I watched some of your earlier meetings. Meeting number parts of the
Mr. Chair, I cannot hear the witness.
Mr. Roman.
Oh, okay.
You're cutting out. Mr. Roman.
The parts of the presentation I saw, yes.
We're not hearing everything you're saying. It's your connection is in and out. It is good there now the last time you spoke. So if it continues to cut in and out, I'll let you know, and we'll have to see if we can rectify it, maybe by going to the other witness first.
All right. I was saying that the minister's speech did not mention any limits on the case that was imposed by the Supreme Court of Canada. No one expected the minister to provide a long legal analysis, but the case law is complex and often misunderstood. Litigation is better than violence, but it never provides long-term solutions. And that's why I was happy to hear your minister say that the nation-to-nation negotiations are taking place. To negotiate fairly, however, the minister must understand the law as it is and not as someone might like it to be. Floating around in the media for several years has been what I call the Marshall myth. That is that the indigenous fishers have the right to catch whatever they want, whenever they want, and provided it is only for a modest livelihood. That's not what the Supreme Court of Canada held as I read it. There were two sets of reasons released 3 months apart. In the second set of reasons, the court backtracked and narrowed the first set of reasons. It explained that it acquitted Mr. Marshall for fishing for eels, but the court refused to recognize a treaty right covering any species other than eels, because each aquatic species raised different evolving legal issues under different conservation requirements, both for present and future fisheries regulations. The Supreme Court has never recognized two classes of lobster fishers, indigenous and non-indigenous, having different rights. Lobsters are not eels. The Marshall decision was about eels, and on its face as worded, cannot apply to lobsters or to any other species. Our Constitution, Section 35, protects existing rights, but it doesn't create new ones. Because there's no treaty right to fish for lobsters, out of compliance with generally applicable regulations. There can be no constitutional right to earn an illegal income from lobsters, whether that is modest or not. Then in 2005 came the court's decision in the Stephen Marshall case, decided about 5 years after the Sparrow case. The Stephen Marshall case narrowed the resource rights even more closely to what was the actual practice way back in 1760, at the time of which lobster fishing didn't even exist. So where are we today? Today, 21 years after the Donald Marshall decision, Canada has no judicial answer and no support for non-compliant lobster fishing. So if this committee wants to recommend authorizing the Mi'kmaq to fish for lobsters out of season or some other way, my advice is to recommend a new law that does that. But be honest, don't hide behind the Marshall myth to pretend that the law is what it is not. That would be fake law, and that would be inconsistent with a policy of transparency and accountability. Those are my remarks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Then we'll now go to Mr. Shiley for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to thank the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans for inviting me today and address the issues of Mi'kmaq treaty rights implementation. I was privileged to be involved as co-counsel and assist Mr. Bruce Wildsmith on the original Donald Marshall Jr. case. For my opening remarks, I would like to touch on 3 points. First, the reliance that people have been giving to the 2 companion cases, Marshall and Marshall II. Second, a definition of what I would prefer to call parameters around the concept of moderate livelihood. Third, the rights reconciliation approach and community fishing plans. The companion cases of Marshall and Marshall II. In reviewing the record of past witnesses before this committee, I have seen far too much emphasis placed on Marshall II as somehow being a negation of the first Marshall decision, or as being legal authority for the proposition that DFO can unilaterally impose existing regulatory authorities already found in the Fisheries Act and regulations. Marshall II must be read within the context of both cases and the facts that gave rise to the acquittal of Donald Marshall Jr. Marshall II was, in fact, a rejection by the Supreme Court of an application by the West Nova Fishermen's Coalition to rehear Marshall. In fact, Marshall II confirms that Crown obligations toward the implementation of the moderate livelihood right must be guided by the honor of the Crown, and Crown actions will require justification as that test has been developed by the Supreme Court through cases such as Badger. Marshall II does add the concept of, quote unquote, compelling and substantial public objectives to the usual justification requirement of conservation, but goes on to state that this does not include, quote unquote, disruption or inconvenience to non-Mi'kmaq fishermen. Therefore, the same arguments being made to this committee by fisheries associations were rejected by the Supreme Court in 1999 and are even further from the mark after 2 decades of subsequent case law respecting Crown obligations in their dealings with First Nations respecting rights implementation. Parameters around moderate livelihood. When reading Marshall and Marshall II, it is clear that the Supreme Court did not have a specific monetary amount in mind as a definition of moderate livelihood. They were placing the concept on a spectrum. At one end of the spectrum was FSC or food fishing. At the other end was full-scale commercial fishing. The court clearly felt that the parties, through negotiations, were best placed to find where on that spectrum the answer lay. Marshall II is clear that any answer or definition for what a moderate livelihood fishery is must be justified per acceptable legal obligations and must be in terms that can be administered by the regulator, DFO, and understood by the Mi'kmaq community. Therefore, the socioeconomic concept of moderate livelihood, which drifts us into concepts like living wage and median income, is not the expertise of DFO. What is the purview of DFO is developing with the Mi'kmaq rules around the fishery, such as trap numbers that fall on the proper point in the spectrum. Third, rights reconciliation approach and community fishing plans. In 2016, the Assembly of Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq Chiefs proposed a rights reconciliation approach, or RRA, to Canada and Nova Scotia as an alternative to the comprehensive claims policy. This approach was predicated on the fact that the Mi'kmaq of Nova Scotia had existing, recognized, and valid treaties with the Crown and were interested in developing a series of separate arrangements to implement those treaties based on subject matter. I myself am in the process and advanced stages of developing an RRA with Parks Canada and beginning RRA discussions on wildlife management with the province of Nova Scotia to build on co-management initiatives that we have had success with. A key component of the RRA approach is the development of interim or incremental arrangements that let both parties test drive potential solutions. This has led to great successes with Parks Canada and the province of Nova Scotia. I am most familiar with the community fishing plans that have been developed and submitted by Bodledek, Pictou Landing, and Annapolis Valley First Nations. These plans have been submitted to DFO in order to develop interim or incremental arrangements to support a livelihood fishery. These communities, through negotiation and consultation processes, have attempted to engage DFO with respect to the operations and substance of these plans. This is perfectly in line with the proposed RRA approach that we developed in 2016. DFO, unique to all other federal or provincial authorities, has unfortunately co-opted the label of RRA and applied it to a process that is not consistent with the spirit or intent of the RRA concept, a process that DFO has unilaterally developed based on their own regulatory models, a process that is founded on self-serving and purposely obstructive mandates. To date, I would not classify any engagements with DFO as true to the RRA approach. Thank you, and I invite any questions from the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Shiley. I don't believe the other witness has signed on yet, so we'll go to our questioning. First up, for 6 minutes or less, Mr. Williamson, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our two witnesses. Mr. And if I pronounce this incorrect, please correct me right away. I think you'll be doing us all a service. Shiley?
Shiley.
Pardon me.
No problem. Nobody gets it right the first time.
Shiley. Pardon me, Mr. Shiley. So can you explain? I'm curious. This is I remember 21 years ago, when the Marshall case was when the Supreme Court brought forward the Marshall decision, and then 2 months later, the subsequent Marshall 2 appeared. It did seem that Marshall 2 put parameters around the initial decision. And is it your contention that it didn't do that? That Marshall is quite wide and broad, and the clarification, which is certainly how it was reported in the media, put parameters on it to signal that there had to be collaboration and cooperation, negotiation between the federal government and First Nations. And at the end of the day, on conservation grounds, the federal government would be supreme. I know that's a word that a lot of people don't like to use, but that seems to be a fair reading of the Marshall decision. Certainly one that was reported in the popular press 21 years ago.
Yeah, I think my contention truly is if you put everything into context, and remember Marshall 2 was, as you're saying, a companion decision to Marshall 1. First of all, you have to remember that the facts of Marshall 2 are the facts of Marshall 1. Mm-hmm. It involves the activities of Donald Marshall Jr. And all of the facts surrounding what he was doing. When you read Marshall 2 and what it is saying, is in a lot of ways, it is simply expounding on what the Supreme Court very directly is saying are fundamental tenets of the way that all treaty and Aboriginal rights litigation are looked at. So when we talk about, does the federal government ultimately have authorities to look out for things like conservation and public safety? Absolutely, it says that. But what they're saying in Marshall 2 is that was part and parcel of what Marshall 1 is all about as well. Marshall 1 cannot stand for the proposition that the federal government does not have ultimately the ability to regulate for things like conservation and public safety. What Marshall 2 then also says is, though, we're not minimizing the tests that the federal government has to do when it looks at regulations. So it has to justify its regulations. Are its regulations truly directing themselves toward consultation and public safety? Are the regulations the minimum of infringement on rights to reach the federal government's goals and what it wants to do with its regulations? All of those, when it talks about the Badger case in Marshall 2, are still the existing and normal ways that we would look at federal government action when it comes to the way that they would look at justification. So that's why I'm just making the ultimate argument that says this idea that a new case, a companion case, a few months later, based on the exact same facts as the first case, could somehow come up with a different conclusion than the first case did, I just don't think has merit.
Sure, I could appreciate that. I mean, I would think, would you agree, and very briefly, I want to ask Mr. Roman a question, that the Marshall 2 talked about perhaps rights and responsibilities on both the federal government and First Nations?
Yes, I think it reiterated the fact that it's up to governments and First Nations to negotiate these things out.
Perfect. Thank you. Mr. Roman, would you have any comment on that? I'd like to get your comments on how those two decisions, I call them the Marshall, I call it the Marshall decisions because I think they both have to be read. But any comments on how those two court cases need to be read together to ensure we arrive at the right outcome?
I see the two Donald Marshall sets of reasons as being one decision explained twice. There was only one decision, and the decision was that Donald Marshall was not to be convicted. But in the first part of that, or in the first reasons for the decision, there was a strong dissent from Justice Beverly McLaughlin, who was not known as a right-wing zealot, but as a middle-of-the-road judge. And what she dissented was quite strong, and so to create a unanimous decision, they came back 3 months later and watered down what they said the first time. Then along comes Marshall, the second decision, several years, 6, 7 years later, and I wanted to mention there that Justice Beverly McLaughlin, who was writing for the majority in the Stevens Marshall case, held that there was no right to commercial logging under the same treaties as Donald Marshall because commercial logging was not the basis of their traditional culture. Well, commercial lobster fishing was also not the basis of traditional culture and identity in 1760 because it didn't exist at the time. They didn't have the vessels to do it at the time. So I think this does narrow the scope of the Marshall decision. But that said, I agree with Mr. Shiley in much of what he said about what the test is for justification and the honor of the Crown, that the justification must be as he described it. The question is not what the test is, but how it works today.
Right,
and
very good.
No, sorry.
I'm just going to stop because you're kind of, I figure my time's up. And I see we have another witness here as well.
Okay, we'll go to Mr. Batiste for 6 minutes or less, please.
Just a quick point of order, Mr. Chair. Just a quick, I see Mr. Beliveau, the other witness is here.
I believe the clerk has let me know that we're rescheduling him. Okay, thank you. Mr. Batiste for 6 minutes or less, please.
Yes, Mr. Ziley, can you, did the Crown raise the argument that the minister could regulate the Mi'kmaq treaties during the Marshall litigation? Was there an argument forth in terms of regulating Mi'kmaq treaty rights?
I think is when you read the text of Marshall II, they're spelling out what happened with the potential justification arguments that were put forth in Marshall I. In essence, what happened in Marshall I was the Crown was arguing that there was no treaty right to the activities that Donald Marshall Jr. was involved with, and therefore they didn't feel that they needed to put forward justification arguments on whether or not he did have a treaty right, but there were conservation concerns or whatever at the time. So at the time, the Crown chose not to provide justification arguments. And when you read Marshall II, you see that that's one of the points bringing up is some people felt that that should have taken place.
Okay, so basically Marshall II ruled on something that was never provided as testimony. But in the historic Badger case that they talk about infringing a treaty right, within Treaty Number 8, there's a clause there that says the Queen hereby agrees with the said Indians that they shall have the right to pursue their usual vocations of hunting, trapping, and fishing throughout the tract surrendered as hereto described, subject to such regulations as may from time to time be made by the government of the country acting under his authority and her majesty. There is a clear regulation clause within Treaty Number 8. Is there any regulation clause in the Mi'kmaq treaties of 1752 or 1760-61 that says the Crown can regulate Mi'kmaq fisheries?
Well, I think that the difficulty of an assertion like that would be just the language that was used in 1760 and 61. Is there any direct statement which says it can be regulated or should be regulated by the Crown or what have you? No, there's not. But I think it was certainly accepted. It was certainly accepted by all parties within the Donald Marshall Jr. Litigation that under Section 35 in the constitutional constructs of Canada, the federal government will always, as long as they follow the proper rules and do things according to the way that they should be done, the federal government will always have the ability to regulate resources if that's what they need to do.
Yeah, and so there are certain ambiguities that I've heard from your testimony as well as I'm sorry, what the other witness to. The other witness that we've called. Is there anything within Indigenous case law that talks about how to solve ambiguities if they're there?
Well, I think one of the keys to the Marshall case was clearly you have what was taking place is you had a document, which is the Treaty of 1760, which was written by British authorities, and was written in a language that was common to British authorities. But that's why when you read Marshall I, there was significant use placed on transcripts that they had of discussions between Mi'kmaq leadership and British authorities in 1760 to talk about what was it that the parties felt they were doing, what was their intention. So I think because the treaties come from a time period where language is not the same, plus you're dealing with peoples who come from a totally different worldview, the court, as is normal for most Aboriginal litigations, will look at things and will. And the classic tenet is they will side on the side of First Nations in a broader understanding of what was intended when these things were entered into.
Okay, thank you for that. We've heard assertions here from fisheries associations that there was $600 million provided to Mi'kmaq fishermen and Mi'kmaq communities for their moderate livelihood rate. Is that accurate?
I wouldn't know exact amounts when it came to the Marshall response. I know that the vast majority of the dollars were for purchases of licenses and purchases of equipment. And so those dollars didn't go directly to First Nations communities. Those dollars would have been used to purchase licenses and equipment that would have been from the non-native fishery at the time.
Okay. Last question for both of you, Mr. Roman, sorry, I forgot your name, and Mr. Ziley. Can you think of another case in the history of Canada where there was a need for clarification by the Supreme Court of Canada?
I can think of hundreds of them. There are so many Supreme Court of Canada decisions. Yeah, well, not 2 months later. eventually.
Can you name one?
The only reason why that came up was because someone raised it. But when the Stephen Marshall case came up, the same treaty was interpreted and the court felt an obligation to comment. So,
Mr. Roman, I'm asking about,
happen, and there are lots of ambiguous.
Mr. Roman, I'm asking,
decisions.
is there ever been a Supreme Court of Canada case that needed to be clarified in the same year with the same fact situation in the history of Canada? And if you can you name it?
I don't think it needed to be clarified. I think someone just tried to make it to prevent it from happening, and the
Okay,
Supreme
Mr.
Court
Ziley,
had to
can
comment
you
on
name
that.
one? I'm just wondering.
To my mind, I think, and I should say that I was also co-counsel on the Stephen Marshall logging case as well. But I think with the Marshall cases, I think the unique thing that I see in the way that the Supreme Court handled the Marshall case is ordinarily a new case will be brought to the court with a specific set of facts, which are different from the initial case's set of facts, and the court will look at the legal tenets they've applied according to those facts. I don't know that I've ever seen, and I think what is being suggested, the idea that the Supreme Court would come down with the decision and then a few months later narrow or change the tenor of that decision, not based on factual scenarios that are being brought forward or new facts that are being brought forward, but simply bringing it based on the application of a fisheries association looking for a retrial. And you've got to remember the ratio of Marshall 2 is they're denying the retrial. So it's a unique why the Supreme Court felt that they needed to rediscuss what they had discussed 2 months later is still a bit of a mystery to me.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Charlie. Thank you, Mr. Batiste. We'll now go to Mr. Blanchette-Janka for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think this is very interesting in this panel because we seem to have two different points of view on this issue. So my questions will be for both Mr. Roman and Mr. Charlie, who will be able to answer one after the other. And for Mr. Roman to start with, does the case law in Indigenous fishing mean that the exercise of Indigenous fishing rights takes precedence over non-Indigenous communities, or are these two activities, legally speaking, on an equal footing?
That's a difficult question to answer when you talk about an equal footing, because they aren't on an equal footing, never have been and never will be. And that's because one group has treaty rights and the other group doesn't. I don't think my position is all that different from Mr. Shiley's on most of the issues we've been discussing. I think the position of Indigenous fishers or loggers or whatever else is always complicated because it's a mix of statute and case law. And I don't really have a mandate to say who should fish how much, and I'm not a fisheries officer. All I'm saying is that if you're going to make new law, do it cleanly, which means pass a law and don't misunderstand or misstate what the Supreme Court of Canada did and did not decide in the Donald Marshall case and the Stephen Marshall case.
Mr. Charlie, could you give us your opinion, your answer on this question?
Sure. I think the thing is as well, we have to recognize that there are various aspects of the fisheries that First Nations have rights in. So, as I said in my opening comments, there's a direct difference between food, social, and ceremonial rights versus moderate livelihood rights as well. And I should say that when we brought the case to the Supreme Court, none of us argued the idea of a moderate livelihood. At the time, the Crown and ourselves both argued that there were two types of fishing. There's food fishing and there's commercial fishing. And it was the Supreme Court that developed this third this third form of fisheries called a moderate livelihood. And I think they did that because in a food fishery, we know that First Nations have certain priorities when it comes to access to the fisheries, and that comes from the sparrow case and others. I think they were concerned about the fact that if we started talking about rights in the commercial sphere, what were some of the inherent limitations or inherent parameters, as I call them, that would be around that. So that's why they came up with the concept of a moderate livelihood. But I think what's clear is the Mi'kmaq in this instance are the only ones I know that have a Section 35 right to a moderate livelihood. That doesn't exist with other fishers.
Merci.
Thank you very much. Could you tell us if getting to this modest living could be measured just by fishing income or by the total income of the individuals concerned?
I think there's a problem with this whole modest income thing, which is that it's never been defined. So it's like a Rorschach test. You read into it what you want to get out of it. But as I said in my opening remarks, if there's no right to do something, you can't earn a modest income doing it. And I think that the key part of the Stephen Marshall case was in paragraph 26, when Chief Justice McLaughlin said that the treaties grant the right to practice a traditional 1760 trading activity. So the question of fact becomes, what was that? And if that's what it was about, what does that translate to, if anything, today? And they were not trading lobsters with the British then, which suggests that if they want to sell lobsters now, you should pass a law authorizing that instead of relying on the Marshall case, which certainly wasn't clear on the point, and I think could be interpreted when you look at the Stephen and Donald Marshall cases together as narrowing the treaty right to something that has to do with what existed in 1760. I don't think it's a satisfactory situation to say what existed in 1760 was wonderful. But I think what you should do is pass a law to say, we don't want that law anymore, we want this law. And if you do that, you then have the honesty of being transparent and accountable as a government or as a committee making that recommendation.
Mr. Scheil.
Mr. Shiley, what's your opinion?
Well, as I said, I think you have to look at the moderate livelihood more as a spectrum of the way in which resources are allocated. So if we start getting into an idea of moderate livelihood as a monetary unit or moderate livelihood as family income, and we start having to look at what does everybody have to bring into it and everything else, it starts expanding it way beyond DFO's purview, and where do we go? That's why I think the important part is using community dialogue and working with communities to develop moderate livelihood fishing plans. I think the first key thing is making sure that the number of lobster that are coming out are within the conservation mandates on both party sides, and really let the communities decide what is the best way for community people to start accessing lobster as they go. So if a community decides within its own plan that they are going to provide the access that they have to livelihood lobster to people within their community that may be unemployed or don't have other access to other types of income, then that's something that community can decide going forward. But if you try to make an omnibus rule that comes from DFO, I just don't know how that's developed, and I don't know how it's implemented.
Thank you, Mr. Blanchet-Janca. We'll now go on to Mr. Johns for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for your testimony. Mr. Gill, I really was interested in what you had to say around DFO and that they're self-serving. They're taking a unilateral approach to this, and you talked about rights and reconciliation. We've had several witnesses actually come to this committee that have said DFO doesn't actually have the mandate to determine what moderate livelihoods are or how treaty rights are practiced. That mandate actually belongs with Crown Indigenous relations on a nation-to-nation basis. Is this something that you agree with? And maybe you can expand a little bit on that.
Well, to my mind, and certainly as being somebody who's at the main table negotiating with both CERNA and DFO as well as the province of Nova Scotia, it's always been our understanding that when it comes to fisheries negotiations, that is in the purview of DFO. And certainly DFO has made it clear that CERNA is not there to discuss any of the ways in which fisheries discussions go forward. When we developed the RRA concept, it was built around the idea that we would start with doable action items that could work going forward, and we could develop those in a way that preserved the health and vitality of the treaties and got both parties working together as co-managers in the attempt. The dilemma is, as you've been saying, DFO has come with a very limited mandate on what they can discuss and how they wish to discuss it, and their ability to go out of those mandates seems to be very difficult. And my understanding is they get their mandates from Cabinet through the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans, and I don't know how much CERNA has to say in the whole affair.
Well, that's perfect, because I was just going to talk about in my riding. You're very aware of the New Chalmouth right to catch and sell fish, and they won their court case in the Supreme Court, and the government fought them and appealed, and they've spent over $19 million just on legal fees. And one of the comments from Judge Garson, who was overseeing one of the court cases, she scolded the government for knowingly going to the table with an empty mandate. And so this is something that we're frequently seeing. And, I think you were alluding to that there might be an order in council on some of these issues that they are at Cabinet. Can you speak about, do you believe that the DFO actually has a mandate to resolve these outstanding issues and to honor these court cases?
Do they have a mandate? I'll tell you what I've been told, and then we can decide whether or not they have the mandates. When we had developed the community fishing plans that I talked about, Bodledek, Pictou Landing, and Annapolis Valley, we had wanted to work with DFO to try to ensure that they were plans that both of us could live with. So we put forward those plans to DFO for comment and asked them to sit down with us to discuss whether or not these were workable. When we didn't get any response, we went through the levels of consultation to say, okay, well, let's consult as we normally would consult when it comes to these things. And we didn't get any response. Based on the things that have been happening now, we once again, and I was at a meeting with some chiefs and DFO officials where they said, all we're looking for is just tell us what parts of our plan you disagree with. Tell us what parts of our plan that we can modify or work with so that you feel that they are acceptable. And what we were told is we have no mandate to discuss anything within these plans with you or any approach other than looking for a general type of license that we can use to cover this over. So it really frustrated the chiefs in the sense that really what was the point of the conversation, because they couldn't even get a yes or no or here's our problems from the DFO officials.
Yeah, I think speaking about the chiefs, I mean, there seems to be an underlying effort at this committee to condemn Chief Sack and other Indigenous fishers for practicing their rights. And this commitment isn't a courtroom. I mean, this committee certainly isn't a courtroom. We're here to provide recommendations to the government on how to uphold rights beyond upholding existing law. What does DFO need to change to respect the Mi'kmaq right to fish and for moderate livelihood?
Well, to my mind, and I think this is what the chiefs have put forward, they need to sit down as negotiating partners with the Mi'kmaq at the table, and they need to look at the proposals being put forward by the Mi'kmaq to say, are these workable proposals that we can put into place that will start addressing the moderate livelihood? That's all the chiefs are asking for. The chiefs are fully willing to say if there are parts of our plans that we need to modify or adjust or relook at, then we would be glad to do that. Just tell us what we need to do. So I think what they're looking for is, I think what any of us would look for in negotiations, we bring forward our values, our principles, our wants, things that we want to see. And we're just hoping that the other side of the table can listen to us. We can listen to their hopes and values and what they want to see. And we can come up with something that works for both of us. But it's very difficult to negotiate with somebody who just sits on the other side of the table and says, this is what I want, and I really don't have a mandate to talk about anything you want. So I guess we'll just sit here and just speak to each other without any thought that we're going to get to a logical solution.
The Marshall decision said the Mi'kmaq had a right to a moderate livelihood, not a modest income. Can you explain, what it said in the Marshall decision and set the record straight? What we're talking about is two different things.
Yeah, that's what I mean about concepts like median income or whatever. The court wasn't saying that a person has the right to be a middle class, have a middle class income or whatever. What they were trying to do is they were trying to find a way to put some parameters around where this fishery would fall. So to put it in blunt terms, if a food fishery means you use 10 traps, and if a commercial fishery means you use 500 traps, well, somewhere between 10 traps and 500 traps is going to be where a moderate livelihood fishery falls. And there's a lot of questions that you need to figure out within that. What is the health of the resource? What are the how many Mi'kmaq want to get involved? How many things are we talking about? But that's what regulators do. That's what resource managers do. You sit down and you look at what is the total resource and how are you going to apportion it in a way that that meets all of those needs. So when the Supreme Court said moderate livelihood, that's what they were trying to get at. They were trying to do the sense that if somebody does that, they can't be doing this to accumulate wealth. And they identified what necessities are. They said there's housing, there's food, there's just the necessities of life that all of us have.
Thank you.
And if you're doing that, then that's good. Sorry about that. Thanks.
Not a problem. I was just trying to get the answer in. Good, Mr. Jans, you've gone over time. We'll now go to Mr. Calkins for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. And this is a question for both of the witnesses that were here. As this committee explores the concept of a moderate livelihood, we've had numerous witnesses give us their opinions on this. And I'm just wondering what your opinions would be. Would that moderate livelihood, and is there anything in the decisions that would give us any guidance as to whether or not a moderate livelihood would be an individual right or a communal right?
I don't see anything in the decision that gives you that level of clarity, Mr. Calkins. I think the problem with moderate livelihood or income is that the Supreme Court of Canada didn't quite know what to do. So they kicked the can down the road, and Mr. Shiley is now left with a battered can and has to try and deal with that. That's not helpful. But, when the Supreme Court of Canada or any other court has half a solution and the case is in front of them, they can't take forever to decide. They decide what they can and they kind of fudge the rest. And that's what they did with this empty vessel called moderate livelihood. And now what you have to do is fill it with content.
Mr. Shiley?
I think I lost the tenor of the question. Could you repeat it for me?
My question was, is there any clarity anywhere, or is there any opinion anywhere that could help us discern whether or not a moderate livelihood would be an individual right or a community right for First Nations?
Right. Thank you very much. We put it in the same context as just about all of the Aboriginal treaty or Aboriginal rights litigation that the Supreme Court puts out. these are classified communal rights, meaning that they accrue to a community of First Nations. In this case, the community would be the Mi'kmaq. But they're practiced, of course, by individuals. So I'll equate it to the moose hunt that I do a lot of work with. When an individual Mi'kmaq person goes and moose hunts, they're not an employee of a band, or they're not doing so based on that communal idea. They're hunting for themselves and their family. However, the community, being the Mi'kmaq, have the ability to instruct or pass their own rules or laws that say this is the way in which the hunt will take place. So with moose in Nova Scotia, the Mi'kmaq have decided that nobody should be hunting moose between January 1st and August 15th. That's not written in provincial regulations. That's nowhere that's stipulated. Nope. But the community has said this is the way that we think we should do it. And so the harvesters, when they go out and hunt as individuals or as family members, follow the communal instructions on the way it should be. So I see I see fishing being the same way, which is communities develop rules and guidelines and understandings on the way it's going to happen, and then work with individuals who go out and do the actual harvesting the way that they always would have.
Mr. Roman, in your testimony, you've been very clear that there is that new law should be established to provide certainty and clarity. I'm looking at this from the perspective of, and my own understanding of access to the fishery for the purpose of a moderate livelihood is simply that, access simply to the fishery. Yet we seem to be consumed with talking about access to management, which when we hear things like co-management of the fishery, which is different than access to the fishery itself. And DFO is typically consultative with people who are involved in the fishery, but they don't give access to management of the fishery to commercial fishermen any more than they give access to management to anyone else. Is there anything in the Marshall decisions that would give us any clarity as to whether the department or the Crown needs to give up access to management of the fishery in order to provide access to the fishery itself?
I don't read the decision that way. I think it's silent on that issue.
Mr. Shiley, do you have an opinion on that?
I'd agree with Mr. Roman. I don't think there's anything within, it was never a question being asked of the court in Marshall about whether or not Donald Marshall Jr., either individually or as part of a collective, should have management rights. It was strictly toward access. I mean, I would say, do I think that there are Section 35 rights on things like self-governance and so forth that do start getting into the idea of co-management or partnership rights, as we like to call them in Nova Scotia. But does that come from the Marshall decisions? No, I wouldn't say it does.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. Gone well over, I'm afraid. I'll leave the last couple of minutes of committee to Mr. Cormier, please.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I thought we were like over time limit, but thank you very much. Mr. Shiley, you were talking about, First Nation, maybe like wanting different things. So what is your idea on how to reach consensus between all Mi'kmaq First Nation? Because like, it seems like they all want different thing, right? Like if you talk to some of the First Nation in my area, and the great collaboration throughout the years that we have with since the last couple of years, now that they own a couple of fish plants, it's going well. Like they seem okay with what is going on right now in the fishing industry. They're part of it, their own fish plan. So how do you see or again your idea of coming to an agreement and some kind of consensus because they all want different things? How do you see that happening?
I think the way I always describe it is in governance, what's happening in the Mi'kmaq community certainly is what I call the fundamentals of federalism. We are starting to really understand from the community's perspectives what are certain areas of of concern that may be of a global nature, and that everybody wants to come up with single ways of looking at it, and what are areas where they want to have more of a local aspect and look at it in that way. As I said, I'm working with Parks Canada on an RRA discussion, and we're looking at it as a whole. So all 13 communities in a governance whole. I think what you're hearing on fishing is the communities are saying, at least for the time being, we feel more comfortable in talking about access to the fisheries for our community members as being something of a local nature.
Okay. I think I just have a couple of more minutes left. So, Mr. Roman, what I've seen, I think you are a lawyer or a retired lawyer. You were talking about the first marshal being, I think, like a split decision. It was like 5 or 7-2, something like that. And then the second marshal was like all agreed by all judges. What do you think changed between the first and second decision? What do you think that happened there?
Well, what usually happens in these cases is that if there's a split decision coming down and they want unanimity, everybody has to put a little bit of water in their wine and make a compromise. So there was a compromise when you look at the second set of reasons, because the tone of it was somewhat different. To get Justice McLaughlin on side, you had to give her something. And I think what the second decision did was it repeated large parts of the first decision, but then it kind of watered it down a little bit too. And then at that time, Beverly McLaughlin was just a judge. When the Stephen Marshall came around, she was the Chief Justice and had much more influence, and I think expressed her views much more strongly at that time.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Roman. Thank you, Mr. Cormier. We're completely out of time, gone a minute or so overboard, maybe 2 minutes. I will close out by reassuring the committee members that the witnesses that appeared earlier in the first panel, they're going to be rescheduled and as well, Mr. Beliveau has agreed to be rescheduled as well. So we will get to hear from those witnesses, get full testimony. And to Mr. Blanchet-Jonca, we will make sure everybody is aware of the need of interpretation, and it has to be available for the meeting to continue on any grounds whatsoever. Just on a point, I guess, that I want to say to all committee members. One, I want to apologise for a mistake I made earlier in allowing Mr. Bragdon to bring forward a motion on a point of order. It's my understanding that a motion cannot be made on a point of order. We've allowed it now and done it, but I'd ask all members to please refrain from doing that in the future. I don't want to have to call you out as making a mistake, as I'm admitting to doing one myself tonight. And as somebody once said, it's never nice to eat crow. But again, thank you to everybody. Thank you to staff. Thank you for everybody's
point
patience.
Of order. Mr. I'm sorry. I know you want to wrap up. Just for planning purposes, do you expect Wednesday's meeting will be the meeting with these witnesses? Is that your intention? I know you need to do some planning, but is that what you're thinking?
I leave that up to the clerk. If she hasn't already, if they haven't already lined up the witnesses, yes, we'll try and line them up for Wednesday. But if we already have others lined up, the others have agreed to be rescheduled so we can fit them in along the way.
Okay, I'll have my office reach out tomorrow. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, one and all. Good evening. Have a good evening. We're adjourned.